for and all of its grantees for this funding opportunity, which is called the FAHE, or the Fair Housing Equity Analysis, which so we're starting to look at where do we have a real need to look at fair housing, affordable housing, because we took it one step further than just coming up with the fair housing piece, but we also looked at a regional housing strategy and approach. So we're starting to take a look at that with our board. There's one of our challenges. How do you get 56 member governments to agree on what type of housing policy is needed for the entire region going forward? What's that comfort level? What's that happy medium that everyone's going to agree on as that first baby step in starting to get into the housing arena, which DRCOG in the past in its regional planning has mentioned in its plans, but really hasn't had an approach, hasn't developed policies and suggestions for the local level governments. So that's something that we're starting to take a look at now. We're starting to work on how much we can bring this into the conversation, but also looking at how the funding that we're looking at for transportation is going to be taking into account housing policy and other things like economic development. How can we be smarter with the funding that's provided to regional governments for transportation improvements so that we get the biggest bang for the buck? So those are all things that we're talking about. And as I guess just wrapping up where Aaron mentioned funding, I think the funding is the biggest challenge that we have beyond policy, beyond direction. The local level governments, they're really strapped with funding opportunities. And then housing, how we start to make concrete, real comprehensive decisions with that, and how we make certain that the transportation's there for our aging population, for all citizens throughout the region. So, thank you.
Stand up also. So good afternoon. I'm Ismael Guerrero, the Executive Director at the Denver Housing Authority. And so just by way of All right. By way of kind of the quick snapshot on DHA, we're kind of a small city within the city, you could say. We serve about 27,000 residents. We have about 13,000 plus units altogether, hard units or vouchers, and I'll break that down in a little bit. That we own in 20 properties in every district in the city, just over 300 employees, about $100 million operating budget, and annually we do about $50 million or so in capital construction work. And so in terms of what we're doing about the affordable housing crisis now, kind of in three areas: preservation, expansion, and then neighborhood transformation. So on the preservation side, we are constantly making sure that our current housing portfolio, our both public housing, our project-based Section 8 properties, and the non-HUD properties that we own are up at the highest quality standards. So we're constantly investing in those existing assets because the subsidized housing that we have is probably our most precious asset because we're not getting dollars to replace it. So we are constantly investing in that. This year we just completed renovation of over 600 units of Section 8 property. Some mid-rises and high-rises from as far south as the Denver Tech Center to Casa Loma, which is at 38th near Zunai, Westridge, Mount View and Federal, so really throughout the city. And we're constantly making sure that we have our existing properties up to the highest quality. And we are, and have been probably for a decade, a high-performing housing authority. So HUD does annual real estate inspections, and we always get pretty high marks across the portfolio, so we're happy about that. On the expansion side, two things. We're always looking to see how we can add additional units, hard units, to the city. Of the 13,000 plus units that we have an impact on, or that we administer, about 5,500 of those are hard units, real units that we own and manage. Some of those are dispersed properties, so they're scattered throughout the city, and some are the developments like Quig Newton Homes, the villages at Curtis Park, Benedict Park Place, properties that we own and develop, own and manage. One of the things that we're doing more of now, because of how tight the housing market has been the last couple of years, and the high demand that we're seeing from residents for subsidized housing, and just by example, in September, just past September, we opened up, as we do every year, our Section 8 lottery, where people could register for the lottery for next year. In 48 hours, we had 23,000 people sign up for that lottery. That's up from in the last 5 years, we were up maybe at 10 to 12,000, so almost 100% increase in the number of families or individuals that are signing up in that time frame for subsidized support. One of the things we're doing, because the existing rentals are so tight right now, is we're project basing some of those vouchers with landlords who are willing to commit to having that particular unit be affordable and subsidized for anywhere from 10 to 15 years. So we're trying to lock down existing, working with our landlords, and we work with 2,800 landlords throughout the city, and getting them to commit their unit on a long-term basis, and we'll commit the subsidy to that unit for a longer term. And so we're hoping to get to close to 1,000 units with other developers and other landlords that are kind of committed for the long term to be available as subsidized housing. The third thing that we're doing is the neighborhood transformation work. Right here, if you go down the street to the Villages at Curtis Park, that was one of our early Hope 6 transformations. Benedict Park Place is just up Park Avenue. We're in the last phases at the Mariposa District at 10th and Osage. And that's where we're taking the old either public housing or Section 8, demolishing it over time, and then bringing it back, those units. We're now doing one-for-one replacement of the public housing. We're adding another layer of affordable tax credit units, and then also bringing in market rate housing. That's our mixed income strategy. That's how we're diversifying, and we think making those neighborhoods more sustainable. They're now diverse, ethnically, geographically, generationally, as well as on an income basis. And we're really happy about that model and creating healthy, vibrant communities where there was more concentrated and isolated poverty before. Preserving the affordability that was there. As we look at other neighborhoods, we're looking at the Sun Valley neighborhood, and we're looking at other places where there's going to be future light rail, because we think that connection to affordable transit and access to public transit is going to be important for our families. And so we're already working on the East Line at 38th and Blake, at 40th and Colorado, a lot of collaboration with Urban Land Conservancy, the City of Denver, and others, to expand rental housing at those future light rail stations. So that's some of the work we're doing to kind of expand the availability of affordable housing throughout the city. On the funding side, just to add that, clearly the federal funding is where most of our dollars come from, directly from HUD for public housing and for the Section 8 vouchers, the housing choice vouchers. We're doing what we can. I'm proud that we were able to sustain the sequestration cuts the last couple of years. We did not lose any vouchers. We didn't have to require anybody to lose their voucher during that time period, and we were able to sustain that, as well as, again, maintain our public housing. We actually, through some creative financing, have added maybe 200 units of public housing to our portfolio in the last few years, just by leveraging some capital dollars that we had with tax credit and other funding. So we're happy about that. The other thing we're doing is pursuing some one-time major funding. It used to be the Hope 6 grants that we could get $20 million at a time, targeted to one community. It's now called the Choice Neighborhood Initiative. We're pursuing that for the Sun Valley neighborhood. That's $30 million. With that comes the commitment on our end to have to do not just replace the housing or transform the housing, but improve the neighborhood through an education strategy, a job strategy, an economic development strategy. We can't do that alone, and that's where collaboration with the city, with other nonprofit partners, and in those particular areas becomes critical. But we're excited about what that means for the future of the neighborhoods. We're also doing more to leverage other federal dollars in. So, for example, we just partnered with Denver Police Department, and they applied for Department of Justice Burns Criminal Justice Innovation Grant, and we were successful and got $1 million for the Sun Valley and near West Side neighborhoods to do some more interventions and creative work with DPD there. We've been talking with Denver Public Schools about going after Promise Neighborhood grants, with the EPA and some others. So we're also trying to leverage in other federal dollars in these kind of targeted neighborhood transformation efforts to maximize the impact we can have there. So those are some of the things we're doing. I'll be happy to and look forward to answering questions, but just to share with you a snapshot of what we're doing at the Housing Authority.
My name is the Executive Director for Northeast Ever Housing Center. We're a local nonprofit development group. We're celebrating our 32nd year serving the community of Denver. We started out in Northeast Denver, and that's what our name is. Our home base is Northeast Denver some 32 years ago. And you're going to see some repeating comments here being made about need and what we do. But I thought I'd just focus on taking the first question that was asked of what did we do last year, what are we doing? As an example, what kept us busy last year was trying to do some homeownership projects in Stapleton. And why Stapleton? Well, as you know, Stapleton was a master plan community development that is happening for the last, umpty years. But there's a real lack of affordable housing in Stapleton. Not only a lack of affordable housing, but a lack of diversity. So we were excited to kind of partner with Forest City and start out with trying to do homeownership. And we're currently in the process of setting the first batch of homeownership. And let me give you a flavor of what it costs and how we deliver those units. A single family or a townhome is what we're developing, 3-bedroom unit, will cost us to develop it about $260,000. The affordable price of the clients that we serve, and the clients that we serve make less than 80% of AMI. We're talking about nurses, we're talking about folks that work in the post office, we're talking about folks that work in King Soopers. What can they afford? They can afford between $160,000 to $200,000. So you can see there's a big gap between what it costs us to produce and in turn, how do we sell the units to first-time home buyers or families that need home ownership. That's where we partner with whether the city, the state. It takes a layer of about 6 different financings, going to the city, going to the state, going to Forest City, going to the bank, and layering those dollars where we hope the city will give us a grant. We fight for the state to give us a grant so that that price point comes down, and then in turn, then we're able to sell those units for first-time home buyers. That struggle takes you about a year and a half to kind of package it. Once you package it, then it takes you about 9 months to build it. Once you build it, then you sell it to first-time home buyers. When you do provide an opportunity like that, when you work with the city, the state, and others, and when you really make it affordable, the evidence is there is a need, a dramatic need. We sold all 18 units before we turned a dirt out of Stapleton, because our price point was at $160,000 to $200,000. Nevertheless, they'll take a point that we have to subsidize the units at about $70,000 to $50,000 per. So it does take some dollars. Yes, it does take a good amount of dollars up front, but the investment in people pays a lot more dividends. Why? Well, Stapleton is a choice neighborhood. If I could send my kid in a school over Stapleton, that's my first choice. If I could live in an area like Stapleton where I could have recreation, grocery walking distance, a nice rec center, well, there is dividends that our kids will get out of that kind of investment. So it's just not the first part. The other piece that we spent our time doing last year was attempting to build affordable rentals in Stapleton again. We think we had an excellent spot, very close to jobs. There are about 4,000 jobs in that area where you have the Target, the shopping center. We thought it would be an excellent spot to get affordable rentals there. To get an affordable rental per unit basis costs you about $190,000. We had about 84 units that we wanted to build. Total cost was about $16 million. If you're going to produce affordable housing units at 84 units, and then plan to pay your mortgage with the rent you're going to collect from these affordable housing units, you could probably afford about $6 million in mortgage. The rest you need to raise in different sources of funds. So that's the challenge of raising dollars. And that's the challenge of kind of meeting affordable housing needs, working with the public sector, the private sector, and investment groups. Rentals is a little bit different where you could bring in some what's called tax credits. But I'm kind of giving you a sense of affordable housing need is one side of the equation, but the dollar needs to kind of produce and deliver those units is significant. And that's why you're going to hear the chorus of our kind of group saying that a community like Denver needs to have a dedicated source of funds. It's no longer an issue of federal funds coming to the city. That is not going to pay the dividends. We need to be able to get our leaderships and our politicians to work with us to be able to say, yes, Denver, like so many other progressive cities throughout the nation, have said that we value diversity, we value the investment that we need to make into our community. Therefore, we will dedicate a source of funds that will meet the challenges that you hear. Let me close with a little bit of a different approach on this. As I was thinking of coming in, it's the African Commission, so I said, well, what is peculiar about our community in Northeast Denver? So I borrowed a map from Dr. Carl, and I didn't have enough, but I'm going to try and circulate it, but I don't know if you can see, but I looked at, I've been in Denver since '79, and my professional life has been in Northeast Denver. So I knew this community back in 1970. But then I went back and said, well, when you look at this map that I'm showing you, in 1960, the African-American community was in the Five Points, this blue dot. That's where the concentration was. Right around here was the African-American community. You take 10 years back. If you go 10 years ahead, follow that blue. That blue starts to spread to Northeast Denver. Park Hill, that's about it. Nothing in Montbello, nothing outside in Aurora, very few in Aurora. Then you go another year to 1980. Now you start seeing us moving out to a lot broader than Northeast Denver into Montbello. I'm going to try and make a sense out of this. By the time you get to 1990, you're seeing spread out into Montbello and a little bit in Aurora. 2000, with a lot more in Aurora, the blues, a lot more in Montbello and Green Valley Ranch. You come to 2010, there's hardly any blue spot in the Five Points. And in Whittier. So why? Why is that happening? You could correlate that with housing. You could correlate that with the existence of affordable housing. You could correlate that with gentrification. You can correlate that with what is happening today in Whittier, in Clayton, and in all these northeast quadrants where you're seeing a lot of these homes being renovated, but yet not affordable. The old-time residents of Northeast Park Hill, probably most of your parents, had stayed in their home for a long time, but the young folk have moved to Aurora in seeking affordable rentals, affordable homes. So the fact is that we need to have some conscious sense of retention and some sort of an incentive for long-time residents to stay. There are communities that have consciously provided incentives for long-time residents, like in the areas of Whittier, Clayton. What have they done? They have given them tax incentives. When they value diversity, they have given tax incentives for residents, long-time residents, to stay. Because the issue is, when other homes are being renovated, the tax bases start going up. Why are folks forced to sell? They can't afford the tax bases. So these are the kind of things that we hope to do to retain long-term residents. Thanks.
Hello, everybody. I'm Marcy Laporte. I'm representing the HUD office. It's a federal agency, Department of Housing and Urban Development. We work with many of these partners here, and while we might have the programs or the money, we can't succeed in anything that we do unless we have our partners here who accept that funding and who have that mission to do the good work that they do. I am with the multifamily division, and I'm going to focus, we have so many programs at HUD, as you've heard, Choice Neighborhoods, Sustainable Communities, Public Housing, Section 8.
We work with many, many programs, but I'm going to focus on an example that we've done within our multifamily division over the last year or so. We work with Section 8 properties, and many of you have heard that term, Section 8, which means that the resident has an opportunity to have their rent subsidized. They pay 30% of their income for rent, and then HUD subsidizes the difference. In the multifamily division that I work in, we work with housing that is privately owned and privately managed. And that Section 8 is attached to that building. So once somebody moves into that building, they get to take advantage of that Section 8. But once they move out, then the next family that moves in gets to take advantage of that Section 8. And that's why we call it project-based. Ismael, with the Housing Authority, works with another type of Section 8, and it's called tenant-based Section 8. So it's attached to that person. They can take that voucher with them and go find a duplex, an apartment, a house to rent in. And if they move, they still take that subsidy with them. Well, the example I'm going to use is in multifamily, we have some aging subsidized properties downtown. Right now, the downtown area is a very popular place to be, and lots of people want to live downtown. We have a property that reached, we also have a mortgage insurance side of our shop. We insure loans for up to 40 years. We insured a multifamily property downtown called Sakura Square. It was reaching the end of its maturity to its 40 years. Their board decided that they wanted to repurpose that building. They wanted to also say we don't want the Section 8 project-based contract anymore, which meant losing 140 plus project-based units in downtown Denver. And our job is to preserve affordable housing, because once you lose that project-based subsidy, it's gone. We don't have any more money for that. So finally, HUD has become progressive enough to say that if an owner is going to, we call it opt out of their contract, saying they don't want that project-based Section 8 anymore, we are able to work with them so that we can preserve the funding that was in that contract and share that with other properties in the community that still need that funding. So even when Sakura Square opted out of their contract, we were able to share that funding, and we're working on getting approvals for that, for funding about 4 other properties that needed the project-based Section 8 subsidy. And that's a huge, huge step that HUD has taken so that we just don't lose that funding. Another thing that was done specifically for Sakura Square is once we knew that owner was going to let that loan mature and decide to repurpose that building, is we worked with the owner and said, within our rules, if you prepay that loan before it matures, even if it's a couple months before it matures, we can get funding to protect the residents that are currently in there. And we ask and get tenant-based vouchers for them. So we, for that particular building, worked with Denver Housing Authority, and were able to get tenant-based vouchers for the people that were in that housing. They could choose to stay at Sakura, or they could take that voucher and move to another location. The reason I bring that up as an example is because we're doing everything we can to preserve the affordable housing that's out there. And it's obvious you have so many people around this panel. It's not one entity that is able to do that, but it's everybody working together toward that mission that it hopefully will be able to accomplish good things. The challenge we have, and this to me is a very telling sign. Okay, so HUD doesn't have a budget yet for fiscal year 15, which started October 1. We're still working on level funding from last year. But 84% of HUD's budget request, 84% will be used to just hold a steady ground, just to fund the Section 8 that's out there, just to fund the public housing, just to fund the homeless assistance grants. That's 84% of one agency's budget. So that is a huge hurdle to overcome. And that doesn't leave a whole lot of extra funding for sustainable communities, choice neighborhoods, community planning and development. So I do think, absolutely, funding is the biggest challenge out there.
Hi, my name is Heather Lafferty, and I'm with Habitat for Humanity of Metro Denver. Thrilled to be here with all of you today. I know it's a lot to listen to all of us just kind of talk on and on about what we do, and obviously we're kind of deep into how passionate we are about the work that we're doing, and so I appreciate you all being here to listen to us. I just want to take a moment and I'll share just a little bit about Habitat. There's three things, kind of three key things that I think are really important to know about why we do the work we do. The first is to understand the need. 1 in 4 children in Denver are living in poverty. So if you think about it, 25% of our children tonight will be desperate for a good place to fall asleep. That is on top of all the services that are being provided by the organizations and agencies that are here. And so obviously there is a tremendous need. What Habitat does is, and we're in line with what Gate was talking about, we are a homeownership program. We believe that what homeownership provides is stability that ultimately changes lives, that has a generational effect on being able to move people out of poverty or to move people kind of through and the economic kind of movement that you want in order to be able to gain wealth and stability. We know that children, for example, growing up in a Habitat home are twice as likely to go to college as their peers. Now, we're not in the education business, but we know that when kids have a good place to do their homework after school, the chances of them being able to be successful in school are much better. And by having that stable housing is what allows that to happen. We know that that being able to have a good, safe home is so much about what a family needs. But we also recognize that the process of getting homes is really important. And that's the second piece of Habitat's program that I think is unique. And that is that this is not a giveaway program. This is truly a hand up, not a hand out. Families that provide about 200 hours of sweat equity. I should say each homeowner provides 200 hours of sweat equity. Being able to help build their own home, working with their neighbors' homes, working in our stores, taking our home buyer education classes. And as many of our programs have that kind of combination of service and training, that is an empowering piece that is equal, I think, in importance to having the roof and the walls that is the shelter of a home. Once a family moves into their home, they continue that partnership with Habitat by making a mortgage payment back to Habitat, which then we recycle back to our program. And the third key component of Habitat's work is that we rely on the community. We have partnerships with HUD, but not to the extent as many organizations. We really rely more on the private community. So businesses, individuals, churches, local foundations that provide all the capital that we need to buy the land and build the homes so that we can then sell them to families with a no-profit, zero-interest mortgage. And so that is a really key part of Habitat's work. And then we also, as many people know of Habitat, rely on volunteers. Each year here in the Metro Denver area, 15,000 volunteers help us to build homes and to make our program work. So it's a really unique way to bring a community together to not just build homes, but also to put housing and the need for housing on the hearts and minds of everybody in our community. To answer the two questions, I think the progress that has been made that I've seen, and I have a lot of deference for many on this panel who've been doing this work for a lot longer. I feel like I'm still a new kid on the block, 10 years into this, but is that there's been a lot more, I think, collaboration in recent years, that at least that I've seen, and kind of common vision. And I credit the city and their leadership, as well as the work amongst many of the nonprofit builders and those who are preserving housing in the community. So I think that common vision and that collaboration is really progress and something that we should continue to look at, and how we continue to collaborate, not just amongst ourselves, but with the communities that we're working in and serving. The challenge that I think is that, especially when it comes to home ownership, is access to credit. What we're seeing right now is that families continue, 9 out of 10 people want to either own their home or aspire to own their home. They recognize that being able to own a home is the #1 way to develop or to build wealth. And we know that seniors, when they retire, or I should say seniors, but when people retire, those who own homes naturally have more wealth at retirement than those who've been renting. And so creating that stability for families and also for neighborhoods. We know that neighborhoods with a higher rate of home ownership do have more stability, the property values are higher, lower crime rates, tend to have better schools, and so really having that investment in the community is key. And yet, what we know is that the Denver market is the 35th most expensive homeownership market in the country. And so what we're seeing, and this is what Gate referred to in his example with Stapleton, is the cost to own a home has outpriced so many people in our community. And even in many neighborhoods that have been a place for families, lower income families, to be able to afford to buy a home. And so we believe that the gap that we continue to talk about as a nation between the wealthy and the lower income, that housing and specifically home ownership is a really critical part of closing that gap and ensuring that families have the ability to break that generational cycle of poverty, because not only that they have a good home, but they're able to invest in themselves and in their families and in their future by making mortgage payments into building that wealth and equity. So, thank you.
Good afternoon. So I'm your at-large councilwoman, Robin Cage. There are 2 of us who serve at-large on the city council, and I've been serving you since 2011. And maybe instead of talking about housing itself, I'll talk a little bit about the political environment where your elected officials are or are not addressing this issue. I believe that we actually have seen amazing progress in the 3 years since I took office. When I took office and we talked about affordable housing, and I came in as an advocate, someone who had been a community organizer and a policy advocate working to make the city, and I do mean make the city, include affordable housing when it did big projects that it was investing its money in. When I came into elected office, I think the view was that when we had a good conversation about affordable housing, it was because we were talking about philanthropy and generosity as a community towards people who were really vulnerable, right? And it was about those folks who were poor and really struggling. Today, because of what Heather and Gate and others have talked about, we are now talking about something that even middle class members of our community see as something that threatens the city they love. People aren't just thinking about this as charity. They're thinking about, I have this vision that I was going to live in a real city with people of all different backgrounds, and now the neighborhood's totally changing. People are moving out. My kids can't afford to stay. My parents can't afford to stay. Something's wrong with the city if we can't have more housing for these families. That's huge because it's no longer just about some people helping other folks. It's about our view of what our community is. So, status of your elected officials. We now, for the first time, are having a real debate on the city council and with our mayor about the idea that it is our responsibility to step up as a city, not just to administer the federal dollars, but to take action. So some of you were involved in the forums I had about inclusionary housing. This was the idea of having developers include some affordable units as they built market rate. That's a small policy. I have information about it. I can answer questions. But it wasn't the important piece of the conversation. The important piece of the conversation was not that particular policy.
G, can you please come to the circulation desk, G?
The important part was that everybody on both sides of that very divided debate, it was a 7-6 vote on the city council. Both sides of that debate agreed that we needed to move to talking about funding from our entire community. So that's where the conversation is at today. For 2 years in a row, the city council has made it one of our top priorities when we deliver priorities to the mayor for the budget. For 2 years in a row, we have said that revenue, city revenue is important, and the mayor has responded for the first 2 times ever in allocating $3 million in this year's budget and $3 million more in next year's budget. So $6 million for the first time. It's not enough. It's not going to solve the problem. Rick will talk to you all about the numbers. This is my partner from the Office of Economic Development. I work on policy and goals and vision, and he does the hard work of implementing. But that is new dollars that didn't exist before. So I think the state of your political
G, can you
leadership...
please come to the circulation desk? G.
The state of your political leadership is pretty strong. Last night was a ruckus night, right, in terms of the outcomes statewide. We don't know yet what's going to happen with the state legislature, still being debated and still being counted. But you did see for the first time some strong leadership from the legislature in the last legislative cycle. So this is squarely on the radar of elected officials. Here's my call to action before I turn it over and hopefully make up some lost time, being the shortest speaker, always my goal. We need people in this room and the neighbors that you have and the folks in your family to be continuing to engage with all of my colleagues on the City Council and the Mayor's office about getting that revenue done. Given last night's results, people are going to be nervous about taking to the voters the idea of you all taxing yourselves, us all taxing ourselves to fund housing. We're going to feel shy, like we got beat last night, like we can't win, like it's a hard political environment. We have to stay bold, and we need you to stay engaged, to stay bold. We have the political will that we have now because of what I described, because of the people who said to the mayor, something's wrong with the city, and it feels like we're not in the right direction. That political will is an interaction between community and electeds, and so please continue to be a part of that. Having this forum today is great, but write an email to your district council person, write an email to your state legislators. Stay engaged in saying, don't give up, stay bold. I'm willing to pay more. If you are, hopefully you are. I'm willing to pay $60 a year for us to put $10 million into housing, which is a real number. You can generate that kind of return with that kind of investment. So look forward to your questions about any details, but I hope you'll all be joining us long after today in the conversation.
Thank you, Robin. Good afternoon. How's everybody? Good. Listen, I'm like the 8th talking head you've had to listen to. And I'm a little sore. I get to stand up. Why don't you stand up for a minute, stretch, say hello to your neighbor. This is about community, and then I'll share a couple of minutes.
Are you getting all you need on that?
I'm going to move it over. Oh, there it is.
Yep, they moved
So
it.
perfect. Yeah.
You're taking care of it. Terry, with more Terry. Wonderful. I've seen all those TOD commercials. I recommend you got something.
It is more.
Oh, sure.
Well, were you one of the wonderful people who had these for live? I did the Sure. Okay, so you were the with Rider Rangers. And
Well, but it was, I'm trying to think of the
Oh, I got a contract.
radio.
So let's try to
I know you're talking about, I'm looking at her, yeah, but I can't think of her name, but okay, you're talking about her. Okay,
So who wants to talk a little bit about money to the city?
So that was the Rider Rangers. Way to go.
I just called it.
Got about half on.
Okay, because this, so I should turn this off.